Supreme Court again rejects Trump appeal in the Carroll payment case. What happened? Reuters, CNBC Top, The New York Times, and PBS report that the justices left in place the $5 million civil award tied to Carroll's defamation and abuse claims. Evidence. The Wire account says the court declined Trump's latest bid. CNBC describes the rejected attempt to undo the verdict. The Times and PBS track the same order through the federal docket. The practical effect is that Carroll can keep pressing collection while Trump has fewer appellate paths in this case. The legal stakes are narrow but visible. A private civil judgment, presidential litigation strategy, and Supreme Court silence all now sit in the same public record. Watch next. Any lower court collection filing, request for reconsideration, or dated statement from the parties explaining how the money judgment will be handled. For Item 1, the safest reading is the source docket trail, not campaign spin, because the next verified document will show whether the judgment moves from appeal to enforcement. The money figure, the denial of review, Carroll's status as judgment creditor, Trump's role as defendant, and the federal docket together give viewers 5 concrete markers to verify. If a later order changes timing, it should name the court, amount, deadline, and procedural reason in one public filing. Nvidia guarantee backs OpenAI's Ohio data center financing. What happened? Reuters, CNBC, Axios, and the New York Times describe chipmaker-backed support for up to $105 billion in financing for a Buckeye State computing campus tied to the ChatGPT maker. Evidence. Reuters frames the support as a guarantee. CNBC describes backing for the financing package. Axios points to the project announcement, and the Times places the deal inside the broader AI infrastructure race. The key question is whether chip supply, power demand, and financing terms all line up before construction milestones arrive. The business stakes reach beyond one campus because AI data centers now affect utility planning, semiconductor demand, and local tax promises. Watch next. A formal company filing, bond document, power purchase notice, or state development record that names the guaranteed obligations. For Item 2, investors should separate a headline-sized commitment from enforceable financing paperwork, because the next dated document will reveal who carries the risk if costs rise. The Ohio location, OpenAI tenant, Nvidia support, $105 billion ceiling, and power-intensive data center build-out give viewers concrete markers beyond the financing headline. Any later revision should appear in lender disclosures, company guidance, construction permits, or state economic development notices. Ohio officials and planners must confirm site capacity, grid upgrades, incentives, and construction milestones before the guarantee becomes more than architecture. Big Bend border wall work is paused by the Trump administration. What happened? Axios, PBS, AP News, and The Guardian report that construction activity connected to a border project in Texas's Big Bend National Park has been halted, at least temporarily, after public and environmental objections. Evidence. Axios describes the pause, PBS identifies the National Park project, AP notes the brief halt in a contentious Texas segment, and The Guardian adds the conservation context around the desert landscape. The immediate issue is not the entire border wall program. It is whether this specific park area route resumes, changes, or faces additional review. The stakes are local but concrete. Park access, habitat disruption, contract timing, and Federal Land Management Authority could all shift with one new order. Watch next. A National Park Service notice, customs construction update, court filing, or contractor schedule that states whether crews return. For Item 3, the record to trust is the next written agency action, because verbal assurances will not settle the route or timing. The park name, Texas location, Trump administration role, construction pause, and conservation objections give viewers concrete details beyond a generic border policy dispute. If the pause changes, the agency record should identify the segment, contractor timing, environmental review status, and public access effect. Residents, visitors, contractors, and conservation groups will read that record differently, so agency language matters more than broad border policy messaging. U.S. stocks pull back as oil prices rise. What happened? AP News, the Killeen Daily Herald, Cherokee Tribune, and Eagle Tribune report that major indexes moved farther from recent highs while crude prices climbed and investors weighed inflation risk. Evidence. AP describes stocks easing away from records. Regional papers carried the same market move. The shared account links higher oil to pressure on sentiment. The market signal is straightforward. Energy prices can feed inflation expectations, and that can change how traders price interest rate cuts, consumer spending, and corporate margins. The move does not mean a crash is underway, but it narrows the margin for error before the next data release. Watch next. Closing oil prices, treasury yields, retail earnings, and the next inflation print, because those records show whether the pullback is a one-day reaction or a broader reset. For Item 4, viewers should track official market closes rather than intraday noise, because the confirmed settlement prices will anchor tomorrow's risk picture. The named market indexes, oil price move, inflation channel, rate cut expectations, and retail earnings calendar give viewers concrete markers to follow after the close. If the pressure fades, settlement prices and yields should show it before broad commentary catches up. That comparison will also show whether energy pressure is hitting only traders' screens or beginning to influence consumer expectations, corporate planning, and Federal Reserve assumptions. Wall Street indexes slip while oil and retail results dominate trading. What happened? Reuters, BBN Times, The Economic Times, and Market Screener report that the main indexes weakened as oil moved higher and investors waited for retail earnings. Evidence from Reuters ties the decline to energy prices and upcoming company results. BBN Times cites the S&P benchmark move. The Economic Times describes a similar United States market slide. Market Screener tracks the trading backdrop. The story matters because oil costs can squeeze consumers at the same time retailers are about to report sales trends. A weak earnings signal would reinforce concerns that higher prices are cutting into spending. A resilient report would argue the economy is still absorbing the energy shock. Watch next, retailer guidance, crude settlement prices, and bond yield moves after the earnings calls. For item 5, the clean checkpoint is company guidance, because executives will either confirm pressure on shoppers or show that demand is holding up. The index decline, higher crude, pending retail results, S&P benchmark reference, and investor focus on consumer demand give viewers concrete checkpoints beyond a market mood sentence. If shoppers are weakening, executives should mention traffic, margins, inventories, or guidance in dated earnings materials. Those details will show whether Monday's weakness was mainly oil-driven or whether retailers see shoppers delay purchases, trade down, or resist prices. Former federal prosecutor sues the Justice Department over firing. What happened? NPR News, NPR, and CBS News say the plaintiff filed a lawsuit alleging an unlawful and retaliatory dismissal tied to politically sensitive work. Evidence. NPR identifies the retaliation claim, a second NPR feed carries the same account, and CBS adds that the dispute involves termination after work connected to a FACE Act case. The legal stakes are about civil service protections, prosecutorial independence, and whether political leaders can lawfully remove career lawyers over charging decisions. The suit also gives a court a chance to test the department's stated reasons against internal records. Watch next, DOJ's response, any request for reinstatement, and a judge's first scheduling order, because those filings will show whether the case moves quickly or turns into a document fight. For item 6, the reliable record is the complaint and the government's answer, not anonymous claims about motive outside court. The named department, former prosecutor, retaliation allegation, FACE Act connection, and expected government answer give viewers concrete legal markers. If the case gains traction, filings should quote employment records, name decision-makers, and identify the remedy the plaintiff is seeking. The timeline of who approved the firing, what policy justification was written down, and when the prosecutor challenged it will shape the court's first questions. Russian court sentences a Kremlin opposition politician over Ukraine war criticism. What happened? Reuters, PBS, Bloomberg, and Times Daily report that a Russian anti-war politician received an 11-year sentence in a wider clampdown on dissent. Evidence. Reuters describes the imprisonment as part of a continuing crackdown. PBS identifies the opposition figure and Ukraine war criticism. Bloomberg reports the sentence length and links it to criticism of Putin's war. The case matters because it shows how Russian courts are being used to punish public opposition while the war continues. It also signals risk for activists, local politicians, and journalists who challenge official narratives. Watch next. An appeal filing, prison transfer notice, international response, or new prosecution using the same legal theory. For item 7, the next dated court record is the key checkpoint because it will show whether the sentence is contested, reduced, or used as a warning in similar cases for families and lawyers. The 11-year term, anti-war speech, Kremlin opposition label, Russian court venue, and dissent crackdown give viewers concrete markers beyond a generic Ukraine war update. Any appeal or transfer record should identify the politician, charges, sentence status, and whether outside monitors can verify custody. Human rights groups, diplomats, and Russian opposition networks will watch whether the sentence chills remaining local critics or prompts a coordinated international legal response soon. Trump escalates Iran and Oman rhetoric over Hormuz. What happened? Reuters, Al Jazeera, France 24, and the South China Morning Post describe a surrender demand aimed at Tehran and a warning to Muscat in connection with Strait of Hormuz diplomacy. Evidence: Reuters says Trump rejected the deal he thought was needed and threatened action involving Oman. Al Jazeera emphasizes the surrender demand. France 24 frames the remarks among current U.S.-Iran developments. The South China Morning Post adds regional context. The stakes are high because Hormuz is a major energy choke point, and threatening a mediator can complicate back-channel talks. Markets will look for whether the rhetoric changes shipping risk or diplomatic calendars. Watch next, an Omani government statement, Iranian response, U.S. military posture update, or shipping advisory. For Item 8, the practical effect will appear first in official statements and maritime risk notices, not in campaign-style language. The surrender demand, Oman threat, Hormuz chokepoint, mediator role, and shipping risk channel give viewers concrete markers beyond a rally-style quote. If the remarks matter operationally, insurers, navies, diplomats, or port authorities should issue dated guidance that changes behavior. Energy traders will compare each statement with tanker traffic, insurance costs, naval deployments, and diplomatic travel to separate symbolic pressure from operational danger in the Gulf this week and beyond for exporters. Kushner links Gaza rebuilding to Hamas disarmament. What happened? Al Jazeera, Fox News, ABC News, Nepal, and the New York Post report that Jared Kushner said Gaza reconstruction would not proceed until Hamas disarms. Evidence from Al Jazeera quotes the rebuilding condition. Fox describes a stark ultimatum, ABC News Nepal links reconstruction to disarmament, and the Post carries the same political message. The issue is whether reconstruction funding, humanitarian access, and Israeli military operations become tied to one disarmament benchmark. That linkage could slow aid planning if negotiators cannot define verification, sequencing, and security guarantees. It could also harden positions if civilians see rebuilding withheld while talks continue. Watch next. A White House clarification, Israeli cabinet statement, mediator proposal, or aid agency plan that spells out the sequence. For Item 9, the important record is a written policy or negotiation text, because a public quote alone does not show how rebuilding decisions will be implemented. The Kushner quote, Hamas disarmament condition, Gaza rebuilding question, Israeli backing claim, and aid planning effect give viewers concrete markers beyond a political soundbite. If policy changes, a written sequence should name who verifies disarmament when aid expands and which agency releases funds. Humanitarian agencies will compare that sequence with shelter, water, hospital, and rubble clearing needs, because reconstruction delays translate quickly into civilian conditions.